In 2024, some countries are spiraling into extreme hardship. Inflation is reaching double, even triple. The average income and essentials like bread, milk, and fuel have become luxury items. These aren't just hard times. These nations are facing crises that threaten their very survival, with political instability and social unrest rising to critical levels. Today on Explore with Alan, we're delving into the 10 fastest collapsing countries in the world in 2025. We'll explore the real reasons why they're falling so fast. In some of these places, currencies have dropped by as much as 80%. Unemployment is soaring, and natural disasters or political turmoil are only making things worse. If you're interested in eye-opening stories like these, remember to like and subscribe to support our channel. Now, let's start the journey with country number 10, Tunisia. Tunisia faces a complex set of challenges, from economic instability to political unrest. The country's economy, already strained, has been deeply affected by high inflation, which reached around 9.3% in 2023. This has caused the prices of basic goods like bread, cooking oil, and fuel to soar, making daily life harder for many Tunisians. Unemployment remains a significant issue, with over 15% of the workforce unemployed, and among youth, it's even worse, sitting at nearly 36%. The lack of job opportunities has fueled frustration, particularly among young people who are often forced to look abroad for better prospects. Political instability is another critical issue. Since the 2011 revolution that led to the ousting of President Ben Ali, Tunisia has struggled to maintain a stable government. Recently, President Kais Saied's decisions to suspend parliament and consolidate power have raised concerns about a return to authoritarian rule, leading to protests and growing distrust in the government. These actions have also affected international relations, as foreign investors and allies hesitate to support a country with uncertain leadership. Social services are also under strain, especially healthcare. Hospitals in Tunisia are frequently overcrowded, underfunded, and lack essential resources, leading to shortages of medical supplies and a decline in the quality of care. According to recent reports, about 30% of hospitals face a shortage of necessary medicines, and patients often have to wait long hours for even basic treatments. Environmental challenges are also affecting the country. Tunisia is highly vulnerable to climate change, with recurring droughts and water scarcity becoming more severe each year. The government reports that water availability per person has decreased by over 60% in the last 3 decades, putting the agriculture sector, a major employer, at risk. Many farmers are abandoning their land due to lack of water, which further drives up food prices. Lastly, Tunisia's tourism industry, which was once a primary revenue source, has not fully recovered from the impacts of past terrorist attacks and the COVID-19 pandemic. This has hurt local businesses and reduced income for many Tunisians who rely on tourism. Despite efforts to revive the sector, visitor numbers remain below pre-2015 levels, adding yet another layer to the country's economic challenges. Number 9. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's crisis is one of the most severe in its history, marked by an economic collapse, political turmoil, and widespread social challenges. In 2022, the country declared bankruptcy, and while there's been some recovery, it still struggles with an overwhelming debt burden. Inflation, which peaked at over 50% last year, has made it challenging for citizens to afford basic goods. Food insecurity is a pressing issue, with over 28% of households reportedly facing hunger. Rice, a staple in Sri Lanka, has become too expensive for many families, and food shortages persist in rural areas. Political instability is another significant issue. In July 2022, massive protests forced President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to resign, and although the country now has new leadership, there remains a deep lack of trust in the government. Frequent changes in leadership have delayed essential reforms, and public dissatisfaction continues, as many believe corruption within the government has worsened the crisis. Recent surveys indicate that over 60% of Sri Lankans distrust the government's ability to lead the country out of its current situation. Sri Lanka's healthcare system has also been hit hard by the crisis. Hospitals are facing severe shortages of medicines and supplies, with reports indicating that about 70% of essential medicines are in short supply. Doctors and medical staff frequently go without pay or essential resources, forcing hospitals to ration care and focus only on the most urgent cases. This has had devastating effects on people with chronic illnesses as they struggle to find treatment and medications. The tourism sector, which accounted for about 12% of the GDP before the pandemic, has also taken a hit. Since the 2019 Easter attacks and the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of tourists has declined sharply. Combined with reduced revenue from tea exports due to poor agricultural policies, the country's major sources of income have been severely affected, leaving Sri Lanka in a desperate financial state. Number 8. Afghanistan. Afghanistan's economy has been in freefall since the Taliban took control in August 2021. The country's GDP has dropped by nearly 30% as international aid, which previously made up about 40% of Afghanistan's GDP, was suspended following the Taliban's takeover. The Afghan currency, the Afghani, has weakened, and inflation has risen, especially in the prices of food and fuel, making life increasingly difficult for ordinary Afghans. The unemployment rate has skyrocketed, with estimates suggesting that up to 70% of Afghans are unemployed or underemployed. Many government employees haven't received salaries for months, and the lack of jobs is driving thousands of Afghans to flee the country each day. Additionally, Afghanistan is grappling with a severe humanitarian crisis. The UN reports that nearly 23 million Afghans, more than half of the country's population, are facing acute food insecurity. The Taliban's strict policies, particularly those restricting women from working and attending school, have further hampered the country's economic potential. By excluding a large portion of the workforce, the Taliban is limiting Afghanistan's ability to rebuild its economy. There are also widespread reports of corruption and mismanagement, with many Taliban officials reportedly prioritizing their own interests over the country's welfare. Moreover, the country is dealing with a devastating drought, affecting over 25 provinces and significantly reducing agricultural output, which is a vital part of the Afghan economy. Afghanistan has also struggled to manage health crises, with limited healthcare facilities and resources, further exacerbated by the departure of international aid organizations. This combination of economic collapse, humanitarian issues, and social restrictions has left Afghanistan in a dire situation with little hope for immediate improvement.
Before we continue, I want to take a quick moment to thank you all for helping us reach 10,000 subscribers. To celebrate, I've launched a new store with some awesome designs, including brand new Donald Trump designs that I know you'll love. Click the top link in the description or visit the bio to check them out and be a part of our growing community of explorers. These designs are made for true enthusiasts, so don't miss out.
Number 7. Nigeria. Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, is facing a range of economic and security challenges that are pushing the country to its limits. The Nigerian naira has lost significant value, with inflation hovering around 25% in 2023, driven largely by rising food and energy costs. This has made basic necessities like rice, bread, and cooking oil unaffordable for many Nigerians. The unemployment rate is also a concern, with youth unemployment at about 40%, which is fueling social unrest and crime rates. The country is heavily dependent on oil exports, which account for nearly 90% of Nigeria's foreign exchange earnings. However, oil theft and inefficient refineries mean that Nigeria actually imports most of its fuel, further straining the economy. In 2022 alone, oil theft was estimated to cost the country around $2 billion, severely affecting government revenue. Security is another critical issue. Boko Haram and other militant groups continue to pose threats in the northern regions, causing thousands of deaths and displacing millions. This persistent violence has disrupted agriculture and local economies, contributing to food shortages in some areas. Additionally, banditry and kidnappings have spread across the country, affecting both rural and urban areas. These issues have strained Nigeria's security forces and eroded public trust in the government. Politically, Nigeria is dealing with widespread corruption. Despite anti-corruption efforts, Transparency International ranks Nigeria among the most corrupt nations globally. This corruption has led to poor infrastructure, inadequate health care, and a lack of educational resources, all of which hinder the country's development. Furthermore, with elections approaching, there are concerns about political instability, as tensions between different ethnic and religious groups could lead to unrest. Number 6. Yemen. Yemen's situation is one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, and it's hard to overstate the challenges here. Ongoing conflict since 2015 has devastated the country, leading to the deaths of over 377,000 people. according to UN estimates, and left millions displaced. Every day, Yemenis face the fear of airstrikes, especially in cities like Sana'a and Aden, where the constant threat of violence disrupts everyday life and keeps families in a state of constant worry. One of the biggest issues is food scarcity. Over 17 million Yemenis are food insecure, with malnutrition particularly severe among children. The World Food Program reports that nearly half of Yemen's population faces acute food shortages, and malnutrition rates are among the highest globally. The collapse of agriculture, caused by a lack of water and damaged infrastructure, has only made this worse. Access to healthcare is also extremely limited. More than half of Yemen's hospitals have been destroyed or are barely functional, leading to massive shortages of medicine, supplies, and doctors. Outbreaks of preventable diseases like cholera and diphtheria have surged, and it's estimated that nearly 20 million Yemenis lack access to basic healthcare, making treatable illnesses deadly. The economic situation is bleak, with the Yemeni rial losing most of its value in recent years. Many Yemenis now rely on remittances from family members abroad, as unemployment in the country exceeds 40%. Inflation has pushed up the cost of basic goods, and for families surviving on a few dollars a day, even a loaf of bread is a struggle to afford. Educational opportunities are scarce, especially for children. With over 2 million children out of school, Yemen's future generation faces serious setbacks. Many schools have been destroyed, and the remaining ones are often used as shelters. This means children miss out on learning and the chance to build a better life. Number 5. Argentina. Argentina is grappling with a major economic crisis, marked by runaway inflation that has exceeded 100% annually. This has driven up the cost of living to the point where many Argentinians can't afford basic goods. Everyday expenses like groceries and utilities are now luxuries, and the peso has devalued so sharply that Argentinians have little purchasing power left. High inflation has been paired with increasing poverty. As of the latest reports, about 40% of Argentinians live below the poverty line. This includes families who were once middle class but are now struggling to make ends meet. Public sector wages haven't kept up, leaving government workers, teachers, and healthcare providers in financial distress. Argentina's debt situation is also dire. The country owes billions to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and has had to restructure its loans multiple times. This debt weighs heavily on the government, limiting its ability to invest in essential services like healthcare, education, and social welfare. The debt crisis impacts nearly every aspect of Argentine life, as the government must prioritize debt payments over domestic needs. The healthcare system is under strain as well. Public hospitals, which serve the majority, are overcrowded and under-resourced. For many Argentinians, accessing quality healthcare is increasingly difficult, especially in rural areas. Medical professionals are leaving the country in search of better opportunities abroad, further weakening Argentina's healthcare system. Social unrest is on the rise, with frequent protests against the government's handling of the economy. Issues like corruption and a lack of political accountability have eroded public trust. It's common to see massive gatherings of protesters in Buenos Aires demanding economic reform, but the government struggles to find effective solutions. Number 4. Haiti. Haiti has endured a series of hardships that have left it one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere. Political instability is at the core of many issues here. The assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021 left a power vacuum, and since then, the government has struggled to maintain control. Gangs now hold significant power, especially in Port-au-Prince, making many areas unsafe for residents and limiting the government's ability to govern effectively. The economic situation is dire. Over 60% of Haitians live below the poverty line, and inflation rates are soaring, making daily life incredibly challenging. Essential goods like rice and cooking oil have doubled in price, and many Haitians find it hard to feed their families. The country's dependency on imported goods worsens the situation as global prices rise. Healthcare access is another serious problem. Hospitals are frequently understaffed and lack essential supplies, and the recent spike in violence has made it difficult for people to reach medical facilities. Diseases like cholera have resurfaced, affecting thousands in areas with poor sanitation and limited clean water. Education has also suffered greatly. Many schools are closed due to gang violence or are used as shelters, leaving children without a safe place to learn. Around 500,000 children are currently out of school, jeopardizing Haiti's future as an entire generation misses out on vital education. Natural disasters have compounded Haiti's struggles. Earthquakes, hurricanes, and floods have repeatedly devastated infrastructure and left communities in ruins. The 2021 earthquake killed over 2,000 people and displaced thousands more, adding to the country's already severe housing crisis. With limited resources for rebuilding, affected areas remain in disrepair. Number 3. Sudan. Sudan is in the grip of an ongoing humanitarian crisis, made worse by recent clashes between military factions. Since the start of the civil conflict in April 2023, it's estimated that over 4.5 million Sudanese people have been displaced internally, while nearly 1 million have fled to neighboring countries like Chad and South Sudan. This escalating crisis has strained the resources of both Sudan and its neighbors, with refugee camps now facing overcrowding and shortages in basic necessities. One of the most pressing issues is food insecurity. With over 20 million Sudanese, nearly half the population, experiencing acute food shortages, the country is on the brink of widespread famine. Conflict has disrupted farming cycles, and the economic downturn has led to skyrocketing prices. According to the World Food Program, the cost of a simple food basket in Sudan has risen by over 300% in recent months. For families already struggling to survive, this has made even basic foodstuffs unattainable. Access to healthcare is almost non-existent in war-torn regions like Darfur and Khartoum. With hospitals either destroyed or commandeered for military use, medical supplies are dangerously low. Diseases like malaria, cholera, and even polio are re-emerging, with no clear solution in sight. Reports indicate that nearly 70% of Sudan's hospitals are now either closed or unable to operate, leaving millions without access to even the most basic medical care. The economic crisis in Sudan has reached a critical point. The Sudanese pound has lost much of its value, fueling inflation that has exceeded 300%. Unemployment rates have spiked as well, pushing a growing number of families into poverty. Many Sudanese now survive on less than $1 a day, and foreign aid, while vital, is insufficient to meet the overwhelming needs of the population. Education has also collapsed, with nearly 7 million children out of school. Schools are often converted into shelters for displaced people, or have been damaged by conflict, denying an entire generation the right to education and a future. Number 2. Venezuela. Venezuela's economic and political crisis has deepened over the past decade, and today, nearly 7 million Venezuelans, about a quarter of the population, have fled the country, making it one of the largest migrations in recent history. The remaining population faces daily challenges that make life almost unbearable. Inflation is one of Venezuela's most urgent issues. In 2023, inflation exceeded 200%, leaving the Venezuelan bolivar practically worthless. Families now need entire bags of cash just to purchase basic necessities like bread, rice, and medicine. Food scarcity remains a critical concern. An estimated 9 million Venezuelans face hunger, with over 30% of children reportedly malnourished. Store shelves are often empty, and when food is available, it's unaffordable for most families. Many Venezuelans rely on remittances from relatives abroad, but even these contributions are often insufficient due to the high cost of living within the country. Venezuela's healthcare system is another area in severe crisis. Hospitals are severely underfunded, with frequent shortages of medicines, equipment, and even electricity and running water. Diseases like measles, malaria, and tuberculosis are on the rise as vaccination rates have plummeted. A recent study indicated that around 70% of hospitals in Venezuela report frequent power outages, affecting everything from surgeries to basic care. The political situation remains volatile. Under Nicolas Maduro's government, crackdowns on opposition parties and protests have led to accusations of human rights abuses. Arbitrary arrests, lack of press freedom, and strict media censorship have become commonplace, pushing many Venezuelans to question if there is any path to democracy left. Violence and crime rates are among the highest in the world. Caracas, Venezuela's capital, is one of the world's most dangerous cities, with a homicide rate estimated at 45 per 100,000 inhabitants. Security forces are often outnumbered or under-resourced, leaving everyday citizens vulnerable to robberies, kidnappings, and extortion. Number 1. Lebanon. Lebanon's economic collapse, once described as one of the worst since the 19th century by the World Bank, has plunged the country into dire conditions. The Lebanese pound has lost over 90% of its value, causing hyperinflation that has put basic goods out of reach for most citizens. In 2023, inflation rates hit a staggering 170%, leaving many Lebanese families struggling to secure even basic essentials like bread, fuel, and medicine. Electricity shortages are a daily reality in Lebanon, with blackouts lasting up to 22 hours in some areas. Public services have all but collapsed, as government infrastructure cannot keep up with the spiraling economic crisis. Many Lebanese now rely on private generators for electricity, but even fuel for generators is becoming scarce due to rising prices. The scarcity of fuel also impacts transportation and healthcare, affecting nearly every aspect of daily life. Healthcare, once a point of pride for Lebanon, is now in shambles. With hospitals understaffed and resources in short supply, it's reported that about 40% of doctors have left the country since the crisis began. Chronic illnesses are going untreated, and surgeries are being delayed due to lack of equipment. Essential medicines for conditions like diabetes and heart disease are often unavailable, putting thousands of lives at risk. Corruption is a significant issue, as mismanagement and government scandals have eroded public trust. The 2020 Beirut port explosion, which killed over 200 people and left thousands homeless, exposed massive corruption and negligence. To this day, no one has been held accountable for the tragedy, further damaging the public's faith in government leadership. Education in Lebanon has also suffered greatly. The UN reports that around 40% of Lebanon's children are out of school. Many schools are unable to operate due to lack of funding, and teachers frequently go unpaid, forcing many to leave the profession. The country's youth face limited prospects, with rising unemployment and lack of educational opportunities trapping them in a cycle of poverty. Lebanon's situation is critical, with poverty rates exceeding 50% and little relief in sight. Many Lebanese are now looking to emigrate, hoping for a fresh start elsewhere, as the country's outlook remains bleak. Now that we've looked at the fastest collapsing countries, there's a whole other side of the world that you might not expect to see next. 10 countries where Christians aren't welcome. Imagine the challenges, the struggles, and the restrictions that shape lives in these places. If you're curious about the cultural and legal barriers in nations where Christian communities face daily obstacles, this video will be an eye-opener. You won't want to miss it. Click over to that video now to see what life is like in places where faith can change everything. It's one of those insights that truly opens your eyes to realities you won't find anywhere else. Trust me, you'll find it absolutely compelling.